Welcome. I'm Ron Baker, Director of the Canadian Small Church Ministry Centre, sponsored by Small Church Connections. And this is us, Canadian Small Churches in Action podcast. And once again today, we have a great opportunity to hear from someone who has a wide variety of experience. And I'm looking forward to hearing from Karen today. I'll let her just introduce herself. She can tell us what her name is, a bit of the ministry journey that you've been on over the years. That would be great. So take it away, Karen.
Thank you, Ron. It's lovely to join you today. I'm really happy to be here. My name is Karen Stiller. I'm joining you today from Ottawa, where I live with my husband, Brent, and we have 3 adult children. Brent is the rector of St. Peter and St. Paul's Anglican Church in downtown Ottawa, but that's just our most recent posting. Brent has served in ministry, in lots of different places in Canada, as is true for most people who have been in ministry life for as long as we have, which is probably roughly around 25 years. So in my professional life, I am one of 2 senior editors of a magazine called Faith Today, which is a national Christian publication published by the Evangelical Fellowship of Canada. And I too host a podcast, the Faith Today podcast, where I do a similar work interviewing people, and I really enjoy that.
I enjoy it too.
Yeah, it's fun, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's great. And I also am a writer in my own life, an author, and I had a book come out in 2020 called The Minister's Wife, a memoir of.
Are you going to show us a picture of it?
I can. Yeah.
Oh, please do. Yeah.
The Minister's Wife, a memoir of faith, doubt, friendship, loneliness, forgiveness, and more. So that was published by Tyndale House. And was a project that I did. I went back to school. I did a master's of fine art in creative nonfiction, it's called. And so as a writer, for the first time, I had sort of took the opportunity to dig into my own life and write what that writerly thing we're taught to do. And I found, that as I reflected, being a minister's spouse has impacted so much of my life. So that's what I ended up writing about. It's been a wonderful ride full of, good highs and lows of ministry life, like we all know. I find that when you meet someone in ministry, you often right away feel like, oh yeah, we have a lot of things in common.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
And that's okay. Let's jump right into the book that you've written and just chat a little bit about, in working with ministers' wives, what have you found? I mean, there's lots of joys and challenges. I should explain that I have my first wife passed away about 10 years ago, and I'm remarried. Both wives have very different personalities, and as ministers' wives, because that's what I was, a pastor, they approach things differently. Okay, that's going to let you just say what you want to say about ministers' wives.
Yes, well, sure. So I kind of have an unintentional ministry, if you want to call it that, with people who are married to pastors, partly because I didn't necessarily intend for that to happen, but I wrote this book that resonated with people, and I started to hear back from ministry spouses, usually wives, who saw themselves in the book and felt kind of seen and heard. And it's a very honest book. I talk about how hard it can be and what I have learned about myself and the church and God through my experience as someone married to a minister. So it's a very unique life. And you're right, our personalities and what we bring to it, our histories, our faith experience, our ability to deal with the expectations and assumptions of other people all play into how we will live as a minister's spouse, as who we are as people. So I think that's really important. And in fact, one of the, kind of presenting issues for ministry spouses is like, I'm not, I'm not who you think I might be,
right,
or I am not who you think I am yet. I am not, I don't know the Bible inside and out necessarily. I haven't figured out holy living perfectly yet, and you think I have because I'm married to the pastor. So there's lots of expectations and assumptions more. I feel like in today's world, it's more about assumptions.
Mhm.
Um, about what you will be like on the inside as opposed to expectations about, playing the piano or that old joke.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't think that's necessarily so much a thing anymore.
I think that's fairly well past.
I
Um,
do think that, yeah. Like most people have their own careers, of course, and their own things. But I think what I hear as a common, sort of condition of people married to spouses would be, loneliness is a big thing. There is a sense of isolation, of being set apart. Alongside of that would be the question of friendships. So that gets talked about a lot. I talk about it in the book. I don't solve it, but I pose the question, about being friends with people in the church, because that can be a tough terrain to navigate, and as well, people outside of the church sometimes just think you're, a big weirdo, so they're not necessarily wanting to be your friend either. So it can be a lonely life. I think the issue of church hurt comes up a lot. And as a result of my book, I host events online called Married to the Minister, which are very low key. I send it out to, people who follow my website or something, and I put it on Facebook, and we have a Zoom gathering that's, private. After I record it, but then I store it in a secret place on my website so people feel safe. And I interview an expert or a therapist or an author or something. And we, ask questions. And so the most recent one was about church hurt. And specifically, often it's about people leaving a church and how that hurts. It hurts our
yeah.
feelings. And I think that's especially, big in a small church, which maybe we can talk about later. But when you're in a smaller church, you feel it more. We're in a larger congregation now. We've done small, we've done big, we've done city, we've done country. We've done all the things, and it is different in a small church. There's lots of great things and better things, but there's also hard things. And one of those is when people leave, you feel it more. So I hear about that a lot. And I think how we, as people married to ministers, can help our spouses stay healthy, because we are a big part of the puzzle of clergy wellness, clergy family life. So yeah, that's sort of my experience with ministry spouses. I find it a privilege to speak with someone else who's, quote unquote, married to the minister, because I do think there is that, we may be different in lots of ways in our lives, but we share something very important, which is something a little bit peculiar, this weird life we lead that is difficult for other people to understand. So, right away, generally speaking, there is a connection that is worth nurturing.
Oh, I think so. And when I think of ministers' wives, and you've touched on a whole bunch of areas, I would love to have heard your final concluding point in each chapter, just because, yes, resilience for a pastor's wife is equally as important, I think, as resilience within the pastor, because if one or the other is not functioning well, it affects the whole congregation. And particularly, as I think, as small churches, we are really affected by the people that we work with, because it's relationally based. I mean, there's no question if you're in a small church. I remember coming into a small church as a pastor, and within the first year, some of my best friends left to another church. And I'm thinking, oh my. And so you've really touched on a lot of that.
Yeah,
What would
that
you,
is so hard when
yeah,
that
it
happens.
is.
Yeah.
It is. And so what would you say is okay, let's take a final concluding of your conclusion. What would you give as the advice for a minister's wife? Any piece that you think would be important?
Well, I think, and I will say that I do think it's different for women married to ministers as opposed to men married to ministers. I think it's a different experience. And, whatever the reasons for that are, I think there is something particular that the church does still, even taking into account what I said about expectations versus assumptions.
Yeah.
The church assumes that you are going to be involved, and that I think you need to push back against the 2-for-1 idea that is still out there. But having said that, it can be a joy to serve alongside your spouse. Like I over the years, I have generally, and this is probably my biggest piece of advice, I've tried to only do the things that I would have done otherwise, even if I had been someone attending the church, or at least that's what I tell myself. I'm sure I wouldn't have been as involved, but I try to do things that I am gifted at or wanting to learn, or, areas that I'm good at to serve. I think the times where I've made mistakes is when I've gotten involved in areas where I just was not naturally good at. Like, for a time, we were in a small church, and I'm Anglican, and we have like a chancel guild or an altar guild, and, generally a group of people who are looking after, the quote unquote holy hardware, they call it, the goblets, the linens. And so, Brent, my husband, felt the absence of volunteers. So I'm like, I'll help, I'll step up. Yeah. And, it was just horrible. Like I would get phone calls on Sunday morning. Guess who's on the Chancel Guild today? Me? And I, thankfully we lived next door, so I could run over and but I, I'm just terrible at ironing, and I just should not have been involved in that. So that was a reminder to me. Like when I take up a space, that means that, someone else is not doing it. And sometimes people will eventually step up. So I think that's been my biggest thing. If you can only be involved in what you would naturally be doing anyway. And even as I say that, I don't follow that today. Even I still do things because I want to help. I want to make life easier for my husband. And I think that's a very natural inclination. But so if you're both thinking that way, then your spouse, who is the pastor, will also be hopefully protecting you from being too stretched, or from everything becoming about the church, from, it is a vocation that seeps through potentially every part of your life. And, that may be like fun and romantic and feel right and holy and everything, but it is very difficult, and I'm going to say dangerous, to sustain that over many years. You have to cultivate your own family life, your own marriage, your own children's life.
Let me tease out a little bit of what you said. If the Chancel Guild wasn't what you could be doing or should be doing, what would you say? And I'm just looking at what you're currently doing. What would you say is this is where I want to go right now in a small church, or within your own life and your own direction and vision?
So are you asking me how you would determine that, or literally for me personally?
Literally for you personally.
Okay. Yeah, sure. So right now, I'll give you an example. In the church we're at now, I am helping to host a writers group. So myself and another writer who attend the church, we have a very, we seem to be in a very talented kind of artsy church. People, there's a lot of budding writers or writers further along on the journey, artistic people. So we created a writers group, and that is something that I would say I did because I saw a need and a desire. I knew that it would make our church a more interesting, lively, diverse art community. And so I was happy to do that and make that work with my fellow writer. Did I do that because I'm married to the pastor? No, but I definitely had in the back of my mind, this is a cool thing that will make our church even more cool. Let's do that. Like so it's hard to like separate all the different strands. Another thing I'm doing, like my husband started a communications group. I'm on it. I purposely said I don't want to lead it, and I wouldn't lead it. that is something I've learned over the years, that you have, at least in my experience, I've been given a disproportionate amount of power when I'm in a group. So people think I'm speaking for Brent or something. And it's like, I don't want to chair this committee. I really don't. Like, I will serve and but I don't want to chair it because I'm afraid it's not like I'm afraid people are hesitating to push back or disagree or something. So so we're going to start a podcast at the church.
Excellent.
And so that's like, it was sort of my idea, but I'm willingly handing it over to the larger group. I'm giving sharing the knowledge that I have, but I will, I'll keep some of my ideas to myself. I will speak up when I'm asked, but I want to like nurture that, in the group. But, I've taught Sunday school for years. I mean, I have taught, and so this will be like really the first year that I probably haven't. And partly that's because we are not in a small church anymore. And so when we moved from, again, we've gone back and forth, small, large, I would say roughly. And when we landed where we are now, I took a deliberate break. Like Brent has a female associate priest. She runs women's stuff. So I didn't need to come and create a women's Bible study or a women's whatever, as I typically have done, because that was already happening. It would have been like so weird and inappropriate for me to do that. So like, I was happy to just attend. And, the same with Sunday school. There already was someone running the Sunday school. I did not need to come in and, start messing everything up. So I volunteered for a while and taught, and now I'm just taking a little break. But they know they can call on me. They know I am the perpetual, ever-present volunteer in waiting. In a pinch, I will always say yes. And I think I'm happy with that. I'm glad they know they can call on me, but I do not need to get in there and, muck around.
Yeah. Well, the whole idea of coming in and being a servant and then being humble about your abilities. In other words, you don't have to be the powerful one running everything all the time.
Right.
Certainly makes a big difference. And
I think that's important. And that's something new that I'm thinking about a little bit, that I might do some writing about sometime. Like I also belong to a number of Facebook groups for specifically pastors' wives. And I joined them, when you write a book, you're supposed to do all this like marketing stuff, that's so uncomfortable. And, but so I went in this flurry of joining Facebook groups for pastors' wives. Yep. And, but what I've observed a little bit, and I will say these are, I think they're all but one is purely American. A bit of more maybe typically stereotypical evangelical subculture, right. American pastors' wives groups. So that's my all my caveats. But sometimes I think the pastors' wives may step in a little too soon. I think it can be confusing for churches sometimes if there's sort of a revolving door of pastors' wives who are different, like you said with your spouses, like different personalities, different approaches. So maybe the previous pastor's spouse ran the Sunday school and the new one has no interest in it.
Right.
Or maybe like it's a bigger problem when it's the reverse. And, the new pastor spouse is like, well, I'm going to run this and I'm going to do this and da-da-da. I think that could be hard for a church. So I've started to think about it a little bit more from the church perspective, thinking maybe we need to just observe for a little bit and see, take a little more of a gentle entry into ministry when I'm talking about the spouse here, of course, when we enter a new congregation, like listen and learn and see who's doing what. And, maybe don't be so quick to take everything over.
Yeah. It's interesting because I have just come out of an interim pastor contract. The new pastor has just arrived. And the greatest advice that I think I've given and others have given him is go out for coffee, sit and listen. Don't start anything new necessarily. There are things that have to be decided at this point, but learn, know God, know yourself, know your people. It's a great way to do ministry. And yeah, I think people are learning, and this new fellow that's come in, he's doing it, and
Yeah.
I'm
I,
glad to see that.
I
Yeah.
love that. And I think that to me is one of the beautiful benefits of being in a small church actually is the ability to get to know people
Mhm.
and to really do life with people. And so you can, even more, I think, easily and quickly tap into authentic community and contribute to growing authentic, loving Christian community. So that is a beautiful thing.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to change. It really isn't a change, and I'm not sure I've got a great segue here, but here we go. You, you
That's okay.
write, and I love to write. That's one of my favorite things too. Um, because you're co-editing with Faith Today, when you look across Canada and what you're hearing, what are we hearing about the church? Well, small churches in particular, but I think even just the church coming through the last 2 years, but I think it's been longer than that. I could sort of give examples of a diminishing uh, presence, I guess, and other things
Mhm.
too. But maybe you can just talk a little bit about what you're seeing as particularly as an editor, and as you're picking up and looking for writers and that type of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great question, Ron. I think there's a couple things. One, as you mentioned, we're recording this at a time where we're emerging,
Yes.
hopefully, out of COVID. It has been a deeply divisive time. That's what I think. We're
Yes.
big news alert. There are fractures in families and in church congregations, and we have seen that and heard that from people, who read Faith Today. And we've gotten letters to the editor if we did a story that they felt maybe didn't represent their position adequately. And that's something we tried really hard to do, to keep walking down the center.
Yeah.
But I think at the angry edges, there's a lot of feeling, a lot of forgiveness that probably needs to happen. Like for example, in the May-June issue of Faith Today, we did a story about Christians at the trucker convoy protest in
Mhm.
Ottawa. And as we talked about that story, because I'm an editor, but I'm also a writer, I decided, or we decided, you know what, I'm going to take that story.
Yeah.
I live in Ottawa. I live in Centertown. I could walk to the protest. Um, so I was able to get there and actually interview people easily, but also because we sort of we're on the inside scoop of all the sensitivities. We've gotten the letters and the angry emails. So we decided that I would write that story, and it was really tricky. And
Yeah.
I don't know if I managed to do what I wanted to do, which was remain balanced and in the middle. But I think, so many different feelings. So I think we need to enter into a time of listening to each other
Mhm.
and just trying to understand the opinions of people who experience the pandemic differently than we did. So I think that's true in churches. And I think I know it's true in families. One thing we try to do is invite stories of churches who are doing cool, creative things to serve their communities. So
Mhm.
this is pre and post pandemic. And so what I see, are a lot of creative serving initiatives from churches. And I think a small church, again, is positioned well to do that. Like we may think, oh, a small church, they don't have enough as much money or whatever. But what you tend to have, again, is a committed group of
Yeah.
people who know each other. And I'm going to guess you know your community well, and you know the needs of communities. So we see churches coming alongside already existing, organizations that are serving communities and saying, how can we help? How can we join in? We're seeing creative use of space and even lawn. Like
Yes.
there was a really great church in Vancouver. I don't know that it was a quote unquote small church, but a small church could do this. They used their lawn space to create an outdoor gym
Mhm.
for their community. So that's like so cool. Um, love stories like that. So even as it is a hard time for the church in Canada, like there is no doubt about that. It is also a great time to minister creatively. And I think a lot of that is happening. And so that's really, really good to see.
Now, let me just jump in with a question that I've had in a number of podcasts recently is the question of, what is the church? People are asking that question because for quite a while it was Sunday morning, that's it. It's a production, it's an event. And when everything's shut down, you can't do that, or you do it in a different way, but nevertheless, you're trying to figure out what is the church. Are you seeing some of that discussion happening?
Okay, I was really afraid that you were going to ask me, what is the church?
Well, I would like to ask you because you're authoritative. We'll be glad to have you explain it to us.
Oh dear. When COVID happened and we went online, our church went online for the first time. Like, we were not previously streaming services or anything like that. That was really tough. So I'm going to say that I think we all learned a lot. We all learned, we had to. Like, one great takeaway, I think, is that, the church actually can make quick pivots and, exactly. Dramatic changes.
We're flexible.
We are more flexible than we thought. I think that's really true and really powerful and great. So I love that. Let me answer from a slightly different perspective, and that is, again, from a minister's spouse who I have always felt compelled, and I think most of us do, to attend church every week faithfully, except when we're on vacation. And even then we would go visit another church. Yeah. So the obligation of attendance that I have felt in my life has kept me anchored to Christ's body in a way that may not have existed had I not been married to the priest. And that is because I know who I am. I'm a grouchy critic. I can, when people leave, like I'm at the age now where I'm meeting old friends, like even from seminary days, who I realize, they stopped going to church, a long time ago sometimes. And they just got fed up with it, or something happened or whatever. They lost the habit. They lost the discipline. And I feel like they've lost something important in their life. So the fact that I have felt compelled to attend has served me well, selfishly. Like, it's a funny irony, maybe. So I am saddened when people leave this difficult, messy, uncomfortable body that is the church. And so for me, showing up matters. So for a while that was online only, but it still mattered.
Oh yeah, still. Yeah.
Yeah. And so now it's, back in person again, thankfully. And hopefully that'll stay that way. And I think showing up matters. So we can say, yes, the church is, I don't buy that you can go to church on your dock. I don't buy that. And I understand the temptation of that. Believe me, I wish that were true.
It sounds like watered down Christianity if you're sitting on the dock. Okay. Sorry. That was a little...
Good sermon joke. File that away. Yeah. Yeah. But I understand also we are in a time where people are telling their stories of church hurt and clergy sexual abuse and all of those things in very powerful and necessary ways. So I would never like lessen that or denigrate that or say that is not true and hugely important. So I think there are times that when people do need to take a break from church, when they absolutely need to find a different church and, a better church, and maybe it's a smaller church. I mean, that is a place where small churches can shine as, healing places. And we have had that, particularly when we were in a small church near a city. We are a liturgical tradition. We have found that we would get people who were weary and beaten up, actually, from larger, maybe less liturgical settings that for whatever reason they felt emotionally exhausted or something. You know, all their stories were slightly different. And they would come for a healing time, it felt like, in a small church. And that was really interesting to me and beautiful and unexpected. So yeah, I would say that the church is worth the bother.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. I've got, a few more questions I could ask, but you know what? Our time's up.
Oh,
Unfortunately. So
I talked too much.
no. It's been great. I loved it. It's almost like we should do this again, and maybe someday we will, but at the
Yeah.
moment, thank you. This has been very helpful. And I'm just because I'm working through all of this as well, and as a retired minister, but nevertheless still active in the church, what you've talked about is very relevant. So I just want to say thank you very much, and we'll pass this on to our listeners and trust they appreciate it as well.
Well,
Thank you.
thank you. Thank you very much, Ron.